afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Khaldun Azhari. I'm a member of the club and moderating this event. And today we have the Greenpeace activists and experts who will brief us on the situation regarding the radiation and regarding the evacuees' destiny. Maybe some of them are not very happy with the current situation, and we have a lawyer representing them. Greenpeace has been very outspoken and very proactive in following up the situation after Fukushima crisis, nuclear crisis in March 2011. And they tried to provide us with their own independent account of the radiation level and other human crises, and they called many times for government action in certain areas, and they are really doing a lot of activities, and we are very happy to have them here for third or fourth time in our club. I don't remember, you do the counting. But it's good to have them always to brief us about the latest. And quick introduction. Our main speaker is Mr. Jan van de Putte. He is a Greenpeace Belgium energy campaigner, radiation production advisor. To his right is Mr. Mamoru Sakaguchi. He is a Greenpeace Japan energy campaigner. And to his right also Mr. Tadano Yasushi. He is a lawyer representing the people who are having some evacuation issues. And to his right is interpretation from Japanese to English and vice versa. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes, and then we will have questions and answers. Thank you very much.
So first of all, thank you for hosting us here again. And giving us the opportunity to explain the situation, the topical situation at Fukushima. I would also thank Mr. Tadano for the lawyer who is actually representing evacuees and knows in first hand the situation of the difficult situation of the people who were living there and were evacuated. We are really honored to have him here at our press conference to explain the position of those evacuees. So, Greenpeace has been conducting research in the Fukushima area since March 2011. We've been doing several pieces of research, including we established early in 2011 a laboratory in Tokyo. We had ocean research with the Rainbow Warrior offshore the coast of Fukushima. But since 2013, we've been focusing more specifically on the return of people, because then the lifting of the evacuation order became an important issue. First for Miyakoji, which was where the evacuation order was lifted in April 2014 last year, then for Kawauchi in October last year, and now the government has announced in June the 12th of this month that they want to return a much larger number of people, like 54,800 people, back to places that were previously evacuated. So actually, Greenpeace was in Itate already 28th of March 2011, and we called for an immediate evacuation of that area because radiation levels were extremely high. We talked to the mayor at that moment, explained him the situation, and called immediately for evacuation. It took the government till the 22nd of April to evacuate this place. And yeah, today we know that the people in Itate, because they were evacuated so late, were the population that was most exposed of the whole of Japan because of the accident. So it's an important area. And it is, of course, if you look at the radiation maps, we did some research 2013-14 in Miyakoji and Kawauchi. these areas. Itate is this whole area here. It's actually not really a village, but a large area, 230 square kilometers area. So about 6,000 population. And the government is planning to lift the evacuation order as soon as 2016, finish the decontamination work, and which would mean that people would be returning there soon after. So one important component, one important issue I would like to raise is that, of course, since 2011, radiation levels have gone down significantly in that area. So Itate is in this area here. And you can see that in the first period, radiation levels have gone down significantly. However, the situation today is very stable. All short-living isotopes have already decayed, and cesium-134, which has a half-life of 2 years, has already decayed for more than 75%. So from now on, radiation levels will only decrease very slowly over the next decades. Erosion of the radioactivity also goes today very slowly. And so this means that if people would return to that area, the radiation levels would remain pretty much at the level they are today, slightly decreasing, which could be a very serious problem for the people. And if you look at this map, so Miyakoji was this area, Kawauchi this area, and Itate actually has 3 different areas regarding Japanese legislation. The so-called Area 1, which are ready to be lifted, and then the Area 2, where the residents are not permitted to live today, but which are prepared for lifting the evacuation order, and then the Area 3, which is in a way the long-term evacuation area. And so the idea to lift the evacuation order is for all Area 1 and all Area 2, and that's about 54,000 people. So it's a large number of people. And so one piece of research we did was to, which is very systematic, it's only one indication, is to scan the roads, which are lower contaminated in a way, or today less contaminated than off-road in the forests, for instance. And so what we did is to scan every second driving at slow speed with a high-efficient sodium iodide scintillator equipment. So we have reliable large numbers of figures, which makes it possible to compare in the future the same area or to compare with other areas in a reliable way. It's not the risk to the population because people are not living on the less contaminated roads, but it's a good tool to compare. And so of those 11,757 points we measured in April, July, and this is graph here, 96% are higher than the long-term target the government has set of 0.23 microsievert per hour, which is more or less equivalent with 1 millisievert per year following the Japanese calculation of the Japanese authorities. And so actually 30%, this part, 30% of the points are above 1 microsievert per hour, which is more or less 5 millisievert per year. It's just one indication, but what you see, the difference with the same assessment we did in Miyakoji and in Kawauchi is that the situation in Itate is fundamentally different. It's much more contaminated. And when the evacuation order was lifted in Miyakoji and Kawauchi, Greenpeace's position was that this was premature, that it was not a safe place to return and people could not be forced back. They should at least have been given the choice to return back or no, also financially. Compensation payments should not be stopped. But it's clear that the government is stepping up the radiation levels. They started with a lower contaminated area, which is Miyakoji. Then they lifted the evacuation order in Kawauchi, and now they're preparing to lift the evacuation order even in Itate, which is much more contaminated. and which will be much more contaminated even after completing the decontamination work. So my colleague will now introduce the work we've been doing in the area over the last weeks. And so he will present that based on some video material we made. So please, Mama-san.
Yes. So our major objective of this trip we conducted was capturing what is the reality of decontamination from visual and also from the data. And as you can see here, this is the forest of Iitate village. Would you stop? Iitate village. 75% of the land in Iitate is the forest like this, where decontamination is even do not exist. And as you can see to the left side, small area is one community. 70 some years ago, people from outside of Fukushima moved into here, but only around the houses were decontaminated, and surroundings were huge and vast deep forest, even not planned to the decontamination. So the situation living in such land, or being rather forced to back such area, would be something over our imagination. And here we conducted the research, especially for forest and water. Water reservoir here is called the Gambe Dam, and which is used for agricultural use in the local area. So I'm going to explain the details of the findings.
So if we look at this image, for instance, we analyzed contamination levels by taking samples around this small river. And one of the remarkable things you can see is that contamination levels in becquerel per kilo based on sample analysis in the silt of the river is between a factor 2 and 10 times lower than in the forest soil itself. So it's a clear indication that radioactivity gets washed down by water towards the Gambe Lake. So in the river itself is very low level of radioactivity, and that radioactivity from the forest soil is slowly, not fast, but really slowly migrating towards the river, especially with heavy rains, and then being washed down much faster downstream to Gambe Lake and possibly further. This whole mechanism is not yet very clearly understood. There's a large-scale project by the Japanese authorities which is called F-Trace, and they're also struggling to understand that and understand exactly where this radioactivity is ending up. We know that it is slowly eroding from the forest, but where it accumulates again is still a big question mark. The very important element here is that these forests will never be decontaminated. It is practically impossible. Forests are not decontaminated. A part of a few meters, up to 20 meters along the roads inside the forests, just a small corridor. They call that the decontamination of the forests, but it's not really a decontamination of the forests, which means that these forests here are a huge stock, immense stock of radioactivity for the future decades, and which poses a potential risk for the population if they would return to that area.
And another focus we had is where people are living, how the situation is exactly. And as Van der Putte said, surroundings of the houses like here, massive forest, so that there are possibilities that even land itself is decontaminated, risk of recontamination is happening. And also, I'd like to emphasize that here you can see land around the houses were ripped off and soil is apparent. In the countryside, like here in Japan, many people are taking care of nature and surroundings with their love for the surroundings and tendering nicely, and all those efforts have taken away from their living places. Behind the mountain, you can enjoy mushroom or mountain vegetables called sansai. All were not even available for them. So the people to be forced back to here, very heartbreaking.
And so the situation, for instance, that's just one case study, of course, of this house, illustrates already a lot of problems that Japanese official policy does not take into account. And so the decontamination around this house is not completed, but let's say they're working today at the decontamination of the field further down. But around this house, decontamination has been completed. And so, as my colleague said, this area here, they have actually removed topsoil, more than 5 centimeters, and then put new soil on top. That's the area where we find the lowest levels, 0.5, 0.6 microsievert per hour. However, this forest, which is partly decontaminated, yeah, you can see it here, it's like stripped off, like 20 meters high. There, the radiation levels are still very high, 1.8 microsievert per hour, which explains why inside the house, at the back of the house, we find quite high radiation levels inside the house, 1.6 microsievert per hour. And the problem there is that the geometry of this forest, of course, radiates. It's a screen like radiating gamma rays into the house. And official policy does not take into account that you can have a hill, a steep hill behind the house. And many houses have that kind of situation in Tate, actually, in a mountainous area. And then also interesting is that this field, which has been half decontaminated and half not decontaminated, that in this piece, actually radiation levels are still, after decontamination, at 2.5 microsievert per hour. And which, using the Japanese methodology, would give you more than 10 millisievert per year. However, the person living there was doing forest work and is, of course, working outside many hours more than 8 hours as assumed by the Japanese authorities. So the Japanese calculation is 8 hours living outside, 16 hours inside, but those people living in that area have an outdoor life. So this whole methodology is actually underestimating the risk to those people if they would return and lead a normal life. The reality would be, if they would return, that they would probably have to live more inside or keep their kids inside, which is not a beneficial situation. So the further situation is, of course, and this is illustrating how they are decontaminating the forests. This is an area, you can see the rope there. Oh. And in that area, the forest is actually decontaminated for this strip of 20 meters, and which is not really a full decontamination of the forests. At maximum, up to 7,000 workers were working only in Itate to decontaminate that area. So it's a huge workforce doing this already for more than a year. And it will take at least another year to complete this operation, if ever. This is, of course, resulting in massive amounts of waste, which are piling up in Itate about everywhere. And so these will be stored temporarily, but we can assume safely that it will stay in Itate for a pretty long time. Officially, it will not. But this is further and further piling up, and without, at this moment, a clear prospect of removing that waste. Today, in December, actually, last year, there were already 3 million cubic meters of those bags already produced by decontamination work. And the plan is to have about 20 to 30 million cubic meters decontamination waste developed over time. So I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Tadano to explain the position of the...
はじめまして、弁護士の多田野と申します。
My name is Tadano. I'm a lawyer. I've dealt with a lot of lawsuits to stop the nuclear power plants. But on the other hand, I'm also defending many of the villagers many of the residents from Iitate. Iitate had a population of 6,000, and about half of that, 3,029 people, have gone on to pursue the ADR, or Alternative Dispute Resolution procedures. So I am representing these claimants. Iitate is the first case where more than half of a resident from a single municipality has made or has filed for some kind of legal procedure. Put another way, this is a reflection of the fact that people are dissatisfied with the policies that were made by the central government, Fukushima Prefecture, and Iitate Village, the administrations.
あるいは
As I was mentioned earlier, if the radiation doses are to come down, and if people can resume the agriculture that they used to do, and if other people are happy to eat and consume the mountain vegetables or the wild mushrooms that are grown in this area, then I'm sure the majority of the people would like to return. But as I was mentioned earlier, in most of the areas in Iitate, you are unable to avoid the exposure to radiation at the rate of 1 millisievert per year. The effect of decontamination is very much limited. The national government and Fukushima Prefecture have set forth the policy to lift the evacuation orders. That also means the termination of the compensation which has been paid on a continuous basis. If the compensation is not being paid anymore, then for economic reasons, some people may be forced to return to the place that you just saw earlier with the house. But even if you are to go back to that area, what are you supposed to do? You are unable to grow vegetables or grow rice. You are unable to harvest the wild mushrooms or wild vegetables. So does not mean that you are only there physically and that's it. This goes without saying, but the majority of the younger generations with young children are saying that they do not want to go back.
のみと
If the situation remains as they are now, then those people that would be returning would be limited to the elderly folks, especially or in particular the elderlies that are able to drive on their own, even if the evacuation orders are to be lifted. We believe that the wishes of the individual villagers should be respected, especially those that would like to go back but are unable to go back. In particular, those residents that did not own any properties, any real estate in Iitate to begin with, are only receiving the consolation money of 100,000 yen per month. That 100,000 yen per month is used to pay for various living expenses, so they are facing huge difficulties in rehabilitating their lives. If the national government and the prefectural government are to lift the evacuation orders, then they should really find out what kind of needs the villagers have by listening to them and try to find out what it is that they want to do with Iitate, and they should at least show the attitude that they would like to think about the future of the villagers along with the villagers.
Thank you very much for your insights. We'd like to open the floor for the Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have a question and proceed to the mic in the front. Who would like to take first question?
My name is Hiro Kujita. I met you maybe second time.
Thank you for coming.
I write for Yukan Fuji, Japanese daily evening newspaper. I have written about this issue for 3 or 4 times. Now, I'm also a member of the Scientists for Accurate Radiation Information SARI. I'm not a scientist or associate member, and our scientists say that low dose radiation is not hazardous to human health. for example, 100 millisievert. If we look at things from that viewpoint, 100 millisievert is safe, then evacuation was not necessary, and we could release the stored so-called contaminated water into the ocean. I personally talked with the IAEA Secretary General here. He said it's okay to release water. So I thank you for doing the research because I can know the data. But the result of your research in terms of dose rate is so low, and I don't think it has any harmful effect to the nature as well as the human lives there. So why are you so obsessed with the danger of the radiation? Okay.
Thank you. So we've taken in Japan after the accident actually a very pragmatic and cautious position. We've put our own assessment of the risk of radiation largely aside because the accident happened and people had to struggle through it. There's sufficient scientific literature which indicates that even a level of additional 1 millisievert per year is harmful. And there's a whole spectrum of publications going from what you say, one extreme is 100 millisievert, it's okay. Some people are saying this and have been saying this. And the other extreme is even far below 1 millisievert per year is harmful. So within those extremes were not practical to use in the situation in Japan after the accident. And so the best approach was to stick to the law, the regulations, to what ICRP had been saying. Not that Greenpeace accepts this, but after the accident, you are in an emergency situation, in a very stressful situation. It was the most practical way ahead. And so we did put our own ideas aside and adapted a very cautious approach there. And so for the people of Itate, the situation is actually very clear because the radiation levels are so high. This is an area where even today people could get more than 20 millisieverts per year. And as I explained in the beginning, 20 millisieverts per year at the moment that the short-living isotopes are already gone. So this 20 millisievert per year will be there next year, and will add up. Lifetime exposure is a very important concept which has not been sufficiently explored in this situation. Lifetime exposure means that over the next 10 years, there might be far more than 100 millisievert additional dose to those population. And so the concept of lifetime exposure is crucial today to assess the risk to that population. And for Itate, there's no doubt about that this is absolutely unacceptable level to send people back to. The level of decontamination, the decontamination effect, as we have observed, has very limited impact on reducing the radiation doses. And time today will also have a very limited impact on reducing the radiation levels. These two factors combined make it very dangerous for people today to return to an area where up to 20 millisieverts per year. That's our assessment. It's also actually what legislation, which we criticize, but even the legislation implies, and the ICRP recommendations, sorry.
Aaron Charlotte Reuters, thank you very much for your presentation. Have you taken these findings to the government yet? And what is their response, please? Thank you.
So every time we communicate this, and we have now a letter, and in your press package there's also a letter with demands to the Japanese government. Let's say that my experience here over the last years has been clearly that The communication with the Japanese government goes indirectly. I'm sure they're following what we're saying here today, but we don't have a direct communication with the government. Unfortunately, we would like to, but it doesn't seem to be possible, unfortunately. I think it's important for the government to, in the first place, to listen to the population. And what we're doing is supporting the population of Itate and the legal procedures. And what we're actually aiming for is that the government would listen more carefully to the concerns of the population in Itate and in the evacuated areas, and also the population in the non-evacuated areas, which have been given very little or no support till now.
All right. Yeah, I would like to ask just follow-up questions. You mentioned there were some remaining long-term radiations. And could you please give us what the name of the radiations still in the area? You said like the cesium is finished, so they are a little bit long-term. And secondly, what is the effect or impact of the remaining radiations on the wildlife, not on the human? Thank you.
So, two questions. The radiation, which is now primarily, but not exclusively, remaining is radiation from cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years. We know also from experience in Chernobyl that this radiation will remain quite stable in the location. There is some migration, of course, but it's limited. And it remains in the topsoil. There's a kind of circulation of cesium through the growth of plants and redisposition on the ground with the leaves. So it stays in the top layer, doesn't really go deep in the underground. Today, about 90% of all the cesium is in the top 5 centimeters still today. So that's the situation. In your other questions?
Yeah. Other, like you have other than cesium?
Yes, and so there has been a release, when there was a release, especially in that area, the 15th of March. That release, it is the let's say the other isotopes, which are, for instance, plutonium 239, plutonium 241, which can be measured. For these isotopes, they have been emitted, and it can be. Literature is clearly proving that some quantity has been released through very sensitive analysis. It can be demonstrated, and the fingerprint of these isotopes of plutonium can prove that it was coming from Fukushima Daiichi. But in comparison with the cesium release, the cesium release has been the most important release and is today the most important factor of contamination in that area. The impact on wildlife is very important and largely unexplored, at least in Japan, by the authorities so far. We have now seen in the last years the proof of how crucial a good understanding of the impact on wildlife is. In Chernobyl, it has been studied in detail the impact on decreasing number of what we could call microorganisms, insects and other microorganisms which are decomposing that wood in the forests. And so there is a much higher level of dead wood in the Chernobyl area, which is the cause today of many wildfires. And these wildfires, so forest fires, re-emit large quantities in the plume of radiocesium and other isotopes into the environment, recreating an immediate risk, imminent risk to the population, even at far distance from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So it's clear that even 30 years, almost 30 years after Chernobyl, the disaster in Chernobyl is not over. We get new problems. And actually, it's just one example of how wildlife impacts on wildlife are also immediately impacting on humans. And of course, there's a much larger diversity of the impact on wildlife than just the ones that lead to an impact to humans. But yes, so that's a very important question. Thank you.
More questions? We have time. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Makiko Sega. I'm a freelancer and currently working on Korean Times. And so I appreciate about the impact on wildlife. And I just visited the Itate village and then happened to meet some local photographers who taking already starting from this year, he say, some mutation on plant. I show you the photo. And here that number of insects, especially shida, semi, how do you say semi? Mimiming, shikada. The shikada, the sound of shikada is decreased. Shikada, yeah? Perfect? Shikada is decreased. And thinking that, so it's not only him, but Kawauchi villager and also Itate villager, they say it's true. The sound of insect decline. And is it because you investigate the soil contaminations, it's high becquerel, is it because of cesium? Because when they become butterfly or when the egg, it's because of cesium or things that can we deny any link with radiation because of this symptom or because of depopulation, or what you think as an environment is to think about this cause why insects is declining? And yeah, thank you.
So I think in the first place it's important to look at data, yeah, and data from Chernobyl is clearly showing a decrease of, for instance, insects, but also birds. But insects are actually very interesting to look at. The reason why it's declining is a different question. It's extremely difficult to build a model to estimate the dose to an ant or to an insect. It's very little research has been done on that. But today, so it's just there's some causal relationship. We have in the areas where we have more radiation, we observe clearly lower amount of insects and less decomposition of that wood, for instance. That's very clear. That has been researched extensively, but to the full explanation of that is not available yet. And we would really urge, also in Japan, a lot more research in that area, because it could also teach us something about the relationship between radiation and impact of radiation on life in more general. So it's a bit of more fundamental research, but it could teach us a lot about dose response and the impact of radiation on life.
And I'm sorry to add one more thing. And it's a new plan to burn nuclear debris was built did you see, on the top of the Itate village? And only the politicians who had access can go into, just by accident, by one nice politician that I went into just a week ago, power, like the debris, they say, according to government, it's just a debris. They put some filter and they burning. Do you think, and did you investigate, or are you going to investigate?
We did not investigate that. And of course, incineration, there are dedicated incinerators built in the area, also in Naraha, for instance, which are incinerating the decontamination waste, which is burnable, like leaves and branches and so on. Of course, it's a very delicate operation because it could re-emit cesium into the air. And your question on the impact on plants, there has been some confusion here in Fukushima. For instance, some pictures have been distributed already 2011, 2012, showing strange fruits. And so some of those pictures were actually seemed taken before the accident, and there was some confusion about that. So we have to be very careful with that and really look at fundamental research on, for instance, the counting of insects. Let's say cases of a strange-looking fruit. Everyone who's growing fruit or vegetables knows that if you do it yourself, you get things that look very different sometimes from what you buy in the shop, because they're not sold in that way. So we have to be careful not to interpret everything as a cause to radiation and really look at serious science studying this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Maro?
Of course, Japan is also famous for square fruit. I have a question to Mr. Tadano, please. These findings from the most recent Greenpeace trip, are they? Do you plan to put them up in court, in the court cases you're involved in, or the arbitration you're involved in? And if so, how admissible are they, and what effect do you think they would have on the arbitration? Thank you.
グリーンピースがやってるもの
The answer is yes. I intend to submit the findings that are brought forth by Greenpeace, and also there are other groups that are engaged in similar surveys or taking measurements. So I intend to submit those data as evidence as well. Just to add a few more comments, we don't intend to really win on the basis of scientific rightness. The basis behind the scientific rightness or scientific accuracy is that it is not known in terms of the impact of low dosage exposure to radiation.
私たちは言うことです
We intend to make an argument or assertion by questioning whether it is the right policy to bring people back to these areas in terms of society, or socially speaking, as a social policy. Is it the right policy to have these people return to these areas, or is it a right choice to have people return to the contaminated area? Because it is a matter of choice. So that's how we intend to argue.
Right. Any more questions?
タラン先生、質問よろしいですか。はい、日本語で。What is better? Okay. The term nuclear plant-related death. Nuclear plant-related death. There's a literal translation of the term we use in media in Japan. 原発関連死. Okay, but there's no one so far died of radiation. And I asked this question to former Prime Minister Khan when he came here after LEP became the incumbent party. He said that he knew about the low dose radiation, but he made his decision to evacuate people because of the risk of high dose radiation, he said. Well, still, I do not think evacuation itself is necessary, but it's done anyway. Okay, so I think it's high time for them to start coming back, because the radiation-wise, we have different opinions, but not so high. It's low, still, from my viewpoint, low dose radiation, and the people are frustrated not being able to go back to their hometown or home country. So I think, to satisfy the wants, needs of those people who would like to go back, society should help them, don't you think, Mr. Tadano?
とても
That's a difficult question. Very honestly speaking, I don't have an answer for that. I'm a lawyer, so I think of legal consistency. As I was mentioned earlier, there is the standard 1 millisievert per year. So we should think of various other things based on this standard. And this was in the statement that was made by Japan Federation of Bar Association right after the accident, and this statement was quoted in many places. But the upper limit in the area, the restricted area where radiation is used for instance, medical purposes and others, is still kept at 5 millisievert per year. I'm sure you know this, but in an area where there is a radiation of 5 millisievert per year or above, you are not allowed to live, of course, but you're not allowed to eat or drink in that area. So I question whether it is a right choice to have people return to those areas which is the case for most of Iitate. From a slightly different point of view, I'd like to say something different. People that are currently evacuating, people from Iitate that are currently evacuating in Fukushima or Minami Soma, they are going back to their homes in Iitate to make sure that everything is okay or it's not vandalized. And there is a mechanism or a system already set up allowing people to do so. So, factually speaking, there is already a process or procedure in place where people can continue to have the evacuation or continue to live in evacuation, but also at the same time are going back and forth between the area where they have evacuated to and Iitate. So the real problem is what this lifting of the evacuation would mean, which is to happen in 2 years' time, the across-the-board lifting of the evacuation order. What that means is that there will be a discontinuation of the payment of compensation, the consolation money, and other types of compensation for losses. That's where the problem is. So there are about 70 of the lawyers representing 3,000 people from Iitate, and we have talked to the heads of households. We have talked to the individuals from Iitate.
実は
The claim is submitted by a household, and one household would write for about 5 pages in size A4 paper. There are 800 households, so the claim is about 2,500 pages long.
そういうその
So looking at this, what I think is that Iitate is different from other municipalities in Fukushima, and even within Iitate, there are differences in opinion, and even if you are to look at the minimum unit of people, the family, even within the same family, there are people that have, there are members within the family that have different opinions, and these gaps are quite huge at the moment. So if people from Iitate decided that they would not like to go back to Iitate and decide to rebuild their lives in Fukushima City or Minami Soma City or elsewhere, they are dissatisfied with the amount of compensation being paid, which is not enough to go and start a new life.
use
So those people that did not own any properties in Iitate, in other words, those that formerly lived in rented property, and those did not own any forests or any fields, those people are only receiving 100,000 yen per month as consolation money. And when the evacuation orders are lifted, then they will have to move out of the temporary housing that they're currently living in. They won't be receiving this consolation money, the 100,000 yen per month consolation money. And if they don't want to go back, what are they supposed to do? They would have to be on welfare. That's the current conclusion. So I really question the consequence or the outcome of the policy.
Thank you.
So, from our organization point of view, it's clear that the area has been seriously damaged, and people having property there, the property has been severely damaged. And what the government is now asking those people to do is to smile, literally, that's what they are asked to do, to be happy and to return, and not to complain. That is what is being asked today by the government, and ending any compensation payment. And this coercion of ending compensation payment is absolutely unacceptable for us. That's a social disaster. After the first nuclear disaster in March 2011, there's now a second disaster for those people in the making of a government abandoning them and forcing them back. It's not only an individual, it's also a human rights issue, I would say, of not accepting the rights of those people to make their own choice. For Miyakoji and Kawauchi, Greenpeace has never said that people should be forbidden to go back. We think it's too dangerous for people to go back, but that's our opinion. If people really choose to do so, they should get the support to do that. We don't let our opinion interfere with that. People should get the right information, neutral information, not the kind of information they are receiving now, which is underestimating clearly the risk of radiation. And based on that information, people should be given the right to make their own choice. But that means if they wish to do so and want to build a new life elsewhere, they should be given full compensation and the financial resources and support to do so. I think that's a very clear position.
Thank you. I think we reached the time, but I have a very short question. What is Greenpeace policy on restarting the nuclear reactors? Because now it seems the government is preparing to announce one reactor being restarting. Just briefly, thank you.
Yes, this is of course what is behind this whole pressure on the population to accept that everything is going back to normal. What we call a kind of normalization strategy, accepting that life can simply restart in those contaminated areas as if nothing happened. And the clear idea behind that is not so much financially to reduce compensation payments. In the total package of costs, it's not so significant. The real motivation is to make it seem that everything goes back to normal and that you can easily survive a nuclear disaster and that restarting reactors around Japan is a reasonable option. The population of Japan clearly, in opinion polls, clearly thinks that this is not correct. Yeah? But their opinion is not taken into account, for instance, for the restart of the reactors in Sendai, in Kagoshima. The opinion of people living at 30 kilometers, for instance, of the Sendai reactor is not asked, is not taken into account to give the permission to restart, yes or no. Whereas we see clearly in Itate, which is 28 to 47 kilometers from the reactor, much further even, yeah, that the impact is massive, is disrupting people's life. But in Kagoshima, those communities, those prefectures, which could be directly impacted severely by an accident at the Sendai nuclear power plant, is disregarded. And this is an omission of the rights of those people to be involved in a decision that could seriously impact their future life.
Thank you very much. This wraps up our press conference today. Thank you very much for coming. I would like to thank Greenpeace soldiers again for coming here and for trying to save save the issues and the people in the areas impacted by the radiation. Please come again when you have very good result to show us. Thank you and have a nice evening.